Hello and welcome to The Exchange on CBC News Network. Amanda Lang is away tonight. I'm Diane Buckner. If you have a permanent full-time job, consider yourself lucky. Employees with steady, stable work are part of a new global elite. The International Labour Organization says among those who do have jobs, coveted full-time positions are becoming less common. Only about a quarter of workers around the world have permanent contracts. 13% of workers have temporary contracts. And an overwhelming majority, more than 60%, don't have any contract at all. Workers are less likely to have permanent positions in lower income countries. And non-permanent workers are often excluded from unemployment benefits. The survey also shows global employment growth has been stuck at 1.4% per year since 2011, well below levels from before the financial crisis. In total, the ILO estimates 201 million unemployed people around the world. If the global financial crisis hadn't dragged down employment, 61 million more people would have had jobs in 2014. Here in Canada, the gap between permanent jobs and temporary jobs often means a gap in pay. A permanent worker in Canada earns almost $26 per hour on average, according to Statistics Canada. A temporary worker gets just over $20 per hour. Guy Ryder is Director General of the International Labour Organization. We spoke earlier and I asked him to explain exactly who is in that minority with stable employment.
Well, I think the big distinction to start off with is that about 1/2 of the world's workforce works for a salary or a wage from an employer. So you've got that 50% who are working outside that relationship, either in informal relationships or in self-employment. But what perhaps we want to focus upon with our report is what's happening within this 50% of the global workforce which works for a wage. And what we're seeing here is a growing diversity of situations. 13% of the world's workforce is working on a temporary contract basis, 17% part-time. But if you break it down, only about 4 out of 10 people receiving a salary are working full-time in a permanent contractual relationship. So what we tend to think of as the standard employment form, that sort of previous generation's expectation of a full-time permanent work relationship, is less and less representative of what's going on in the world of work. And the question is, what sorts of policy conclusions or consequences arise from this growing diversity?
Yeah, well, I suppose that's the first question is, do you think policymakers should be focusing on getting more people in more traditional forms of employment, or should they be doing more to protect this growing legion of people who have alternate arrangements with their employer?
Well, that's absolutely the question. I think, up until this point, I think policymakers and people in general have wanted to accede to that classic full-time permanent employment status. By the way, that is a circumstance of about 70% of Canadian workers. But if we accept, and the evidence is showing that the world is moving in this direction, that these non-standard forms of work, self-employment, part-time, temporary, are a permanent part of the world of work, and indeed the evidence is not only permanent but a growing part of the world of work, then we have to look at the legislation and the working arrangements that go with it. And here is the problem, because in general, and one has to generalize here, people in non-standard employment forms tend to get paid less. They tend to be disadvantaged in terms of pension entitlements. They tend to be more present amongst the poor parts of the population. So I think that the answer to your question is we should be doing both. We should be seeking to provide people with their preferred options for employment, and generally people do want that full-time permanent relationship. But where they choose not to have that, or it's not available, then we have to ensure equal or equivalent treatment. If I'm working part-time, I should pro rata be getting the same pay as the person sitting next to me on a full-time contract.
So now
we're
your
some way
study
away
did
from
look
that
at,
reality.
You were looking at 180 different countries here, and you did just mention something in particular to Canada. Did you say that 70% of Canadians do have the more traditional salaried, more stable employment?
71% of Canadians in work are on a permanent contract. By the way, that's somewhat less than the average for the high-income countries. The global average is around the 25% mark. For high-income countries, we're talking about nearly 77%. But Canada is at about the 70% mark. You have a very interesting phenomenon in Canada. Temporary fixed-term contracts are very rare in Canada. You have quite a high part-time rate. But Canada varies a little bit from some of your comparable economies.
So now when you look to the future, what are the most serious concerns about these trends?
Well, I think we have to place these trends in the overall context, which is of very high unemployment in the global economy. And to give you the headline figure there, we have just over 200 million people out of work in the global economy. And despite the fact that we are looking at a hesitant, unequal recovery from the crisis which broke in 2008, unfortunately global unemployment remains on an upward trend. So I think we have to place all of these trends within the overall need to create more jobs. Unfortunately, post-crisis, the global economy is generating fewer jobs than it was prior to the crisis. Global employment growth is about 1.4% per year, and that is slower. So we have to get on a higher growth trajectory.
Now you did note
one of the things we highlight in our report.
One other point, and that is you did notice that fewer workers are living in poverty. Are there any other benefits actually to having these contract or part-time positions in the world economy?
Well, I think it depends again on circumstance. There are people who want to work part-time, and in some countries this is well documented and well covered. But where, of course, part-time work is an involuntary second best because a full-time job is not available, then clearly that's not an ideal situation. But clearly there are reasons why these contract proliferations are taking place. I think companies clearly believe in some circumstances it meets their needs better. It provides for more capacity to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. And I think some governments as well think that better employment outcomes will result from this type of diversification.
All right.
Nevertheless, I think we're still faced with this challenge of providing people with equal or equivalent treatment, as I've already emphasized, and we should still be aiming at the overall commitment to full employment. And full employment means that people work as much as they want to work in order to have the income that can help them live as they would wish.
That was Ryder, Director General of the International Labour Organization.